Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Industry Legends interview series. My name is Chris Melissinos, and I'm the Principal Evangelist for video games at AWS. And today I will be speaking with David Perry, founder of Shiny Entertainment, where they created Disney's Aladdin, The Jungle Book, and Earthworm Jim for the Sega Genesis, created groundbreaking hits like Messiah and MDK, worked with the Wachowskis on the Matrix series of games, and is the founder of cloud gaming service Gaikai, which was acquired by Sony Interactive Entertainment and is now known as PlayStation Now. David and I walk through his incredible 40-year history in the games industry, discuss what it was like in the early days of game development, how he found himself working on some of the biggest commercial IPs in the world, and what technologies will move the industry forward. It is my privilege to welcome to the program game industry legend, David Perry. David, I want to thank you again for taking time out of your day to speak with us, right? And here on the Game Industry Legends series. And, I was thinking back to when we first met, and that turns out to be 22 years ago, right?
I know, it's a while, right?
Really hard to believe. And so when I, had started really in the industry officially, getting the chance to not only meet people that inspired me and get to work with them, right, means that sometimes you get those memories really solidified in your brain, in terms of where you were. So I know exactly where I was when I met you. I was speaking on my first panel as a formal games industry professional at CES in 2001. And thanks to our mutual friend, Chris Charla, who was at Next Generation magazine at the time, and he moderated that panel at CES. And he sat me beside you. So you were to my right. And one of the things I remember you stating during that panel with the rise of mobile games was how pixel artists would be in such high demand, like COBOL programmers were back during Y2K, right? And so there were so many memories from there forward that, our paths have crossed over these many years. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is your journey that established you truly as one of the legends in the games industry. So, so with that.
That's awesome. Great memory. I remember those old CS things, and the panels were great. They were so fun. So, and we have our paths have crossed many times over the years.
That's right.
And I'm excited to see the people that you bring on here, because you really have. I mean, you had access into the rooms where a lot of the cool people from the industry were, and so you have access to so many people. I can't wait to see who you get on here.
So look, let's go back to your beginning, not the beginning when I met you, but your beginning, right? So let's talk about your earliest days with video games. So what was the first computer or video game system that you remember having in the home? What's the one that you kind of really, remember having as the first video game machine or first computer in the home?
Actually, I didn't have one in the home. So what happened was I heard there was this room in our school that had computers, and I went to go see what this was all about. And then they said, "You're too young, you can't come in." And that actually made me want to go in there even more. So when I finally got in the room, I was sort of like, what is all this stuff? And they had like a Sinclair ZX81 sitting on the table.
Yeah.
Or ZX81, as they say here. But I was in Northern Ireland at the time. And so to sit down in front of this thing, someone sort of explained it to me and showed how to program a little bit of BASIC, and off I went. I just couldn't stop. Sort of trying to immediately going to games, by the way. I wasn't thinking, I could make a spreadsheet on this. I was like, how do I make this thing do something fun? And so I sort of begged my mother, will you please buy me one of these things so I can have it at home? I knew nothing about this, but so I bought one, or she bought me one, and she bought me a used one from somebody else, and it didn't even come with a cassette deck. So I didn't know that means you can't load or save anything. so everything I ever played on that thing was I had to type it in and then play it and then turn it off, and it was gone.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, that teaches you to type really quickly.
Or to figure out how you can.
Every game you have to type in. It's crazy.
And I mean, so many of us in that era, right? The same thing. I was a VIC-20 kid, right? And it was Compute Gazette. It was saving paper route money to get the magazine every month and then typing it in and then telling, your parents, I need to leave this on. I just spent
Yes.
3 hours typing this thing in. It's like, no, go to bed. And, they shut it off and off you go. Right.
Yeah, you couldn't do that. And so these games, what would happen is when you're typing a game in, it would say lives equals 3. And you're like, if I do lives equals 10, will that work? And it does.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, what else can I do here? And that's how I learned to code was by sort of experimenting with the games I was typing in. I didn't have anyone teaching me. And so as a result, I wrote some very basic games and I sent them off to a magazine and they published them in the magazine. And so I was very happy about this. You can imagine a little kid in Ireland suddenly in a magazine. And one day a check arrived in the mail, and the check, it was something like £600 or something. It was a lot. It was, to me, it was a ton of money, and I didn't have a bank account to cash the check. And so I didn't know you got paid to do this. Like, you can get paid to make video games. That's madness. So, you were saying about midnight. I was up until 3 a.m. just typing, making lots and lots of games. And once you start doing that, at that time, magazines were the big thing, but it slowly drifted into books.
Yeah.
And so book publishers, there's one, and specifically this guy who was quite famous called Tim Hartnell, reached out to me and said, would you be willing to write a chapter for one of our books? And I wrote, and I did. And then he came back and said, will you just do a book with us?
Okay, hold on a minute. How old were you at that time?
It's probably around 17, something like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And,
absolutely amazing.
Maybe even younger, it could have been 16. But that to me was exciting. I didn't really know. I had no plan here. This was something that was just sort of unfolding. But I realized that what I was doing in school wasn't really interesting to me. The games thing was very interesting to me. But I'm in Belfast, Northern Ireland, back in the 80s, and there was no video game industry at all. And so I ended up getting a job offer to leave high school and go to over to England.
Okay, hold on a minute. Before you jump there, I want to ask you 2 questions before we jump into that move. What was the first game you remember? Like, what is the first game you completed? Do you remember? Like, on your own as a kid, learning to program, like, what was the one that you went, this is a game that I made?
There was one that it was very simple. It was on the Sinclair ZX81. It was called Zombies, and basically enemies will come towards you, and you try to get behind pits so they fall in the pit. And it was that simple as a concept. But what I love about the internet is if you go out there, you can find these games. Like, someone's typed it in. Someone has got that book, typed it in, and actually stored it somewhere. And so, I've actually. It was, not that long ago, I ended up searching for some of those to see if they exist, and they are out there, but they're very, very simple. So rudimentary games that are designed to be typed in is really what those were. But probably that was the first one that I thought, wow, this starts to look like a game because you can actually play it properly.
Yeah, I mean...
but in those days, everything, as you know, the graphics were unbelievably simple. So you could be the letter A because it looks like it has legs, or you could be the letter V because it's a little spaceship. That just it's amazing how much we used our imagination back then, and it was, you still believe those were stars, even though they're just asterisks. They felt like stars to you.
They did.
It's just it. And what I think is funny is, I mean, I've gone through the whole thing with the game industry, right through to, cloth simulation, sweat simulation, all that. And when you look back, even, you see Roblox, or you see a Minecraft, the graphics still aren't the thing that's necessary to make a great game. It's really ultimately, is it fun to play? Yeah. And so those old pixely games, when that was the best things on offer at the time, people would get lost in them, play them for hours.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what was so cool about it.
And to your point, it was not just playing them, but then it's stopping the code, hitting run stop, and then going through it and going, what happens if I change this number? What happens if I change these colors? And when I was, discovered that I could type in a character generator and then turn that A into, a shape that I could go ahead and type it coordinates in and change it, then all of a sudden, now it's still moving one character. And I think the VIC-20 had like 23 by 20, resolution. So there was no smooth scrolling. These things were hopping basically up and down the screen. But when you saw it, it's like, I'm creating this thing out of my brain that is now showing up here on the screen. Like the power of doing it right, the empowerment that those early systems gave us bedroom coders, right, it was extraordinary.
I still think I wish there was more programming education done towards gaming, and because it's so fun. It is like, I explain it as it's like puzzle solving, because you're constantly thinking of what you want to do, and that creates the puzzle, and then you solve the puzzle, and you have that same feeling as if you just solved the puzzle. It's like, oh, it's working, and you feel good about that, and you create another puzzle for yourself, and off you go again. But it's thrilling when it's a game and other people want to play it, and it's obviously there's all kinds of different programming out there, but for me, gaming was just the best place to be.
Yeah. All right, so you've been offered a job out of high school and moved to London, and what I find really interesting is amongst game developers, kind of in our generation of them, they all kind of started around 16, 17 years old professionally, like Mark Cerny, you, Graham Devine, who we just had on. So there's some good overlap there between your career and Graham's, and like I said, Cliff Blazinski around 16 or 17. Now you started professionally at the age of 17. You were doing work for Microgen Probe Software, right? Very famous game developers, especially in the 8-bit era, Elite Systems and Microprose. So you leave your home in Northern Ireland. You're moving to London. Like there's no.
That was a big decision.
Like, how are you feeling?
Decision. All my teachers were like, "You've lost your mind." It's like saying I'm going to be a professional skateboarder when skateboards were just invented, right? When people didn't even know what that really meant.
So are you saying you're the Tony Hawk then?
They couldn't understand what I was doing. They just thought I was mad. Like, you're going to leave your education and go and do this. It sounded like you're going to play. It's like it's a toy you're going to play or something. They didn't understand it. And so it was very confusing. But some of my teachers were really cool. And they said, look, like my head of the biology teacher said, I'm going to give you a passing grade in biology as long as you never enter the field of biology. So it was very supportive, because obviously I didn't care about anything else but video games. So anyway, here's what happened is I wrote a game called Drakmaze. That's Drakmaze. And Drakmaze was this basic game, very long listing, so long you just wouldn't want to type that in. And I sent it to this company called Microgen in England, and they said, we'd like to publish it. And so then they went, well, actually, why don't you just come and work with us, and we'll get, we'll get you a car or whatever else you need, but come to England. And at the time, my mother was in England, so I was like, I'm just going to sleep in her living room. So I'll get a camp bed, like an army bed thing, and just sleep in her living room, and let's just do this thing. I'm going, and I got there, and then I had this horrible realization: is I'm like, yes, I know how to make basic games, but we're not making basic games. We're making assembly language games now, and I don't really know what I'm doing, So imagine you enter a room of people who know what they're doing, and you don't know what you're doing. For me, it was like drinking through a fire hose, because I had to somehow turn this around and get good at making a professional game instead of these rinky-dinky things I was making alone in Ireland. And so it was immense pressure. Like, could I learn fast enough before it's discovered that I'm not really up to par with the other people here? And so the thing that was so enlightening was I got to see their code, and I got to see how professional games were actually made. And so the result of that was I did learn really quickly. And there was a guy in charge. His name was Andy Laurie. And that guy, it's really great to have someone who's in charge who actually understands how everything works, because you can't BS them. You can't make excuses for anything, because he understands how it all works. So in a way, he just helps you and you move forward. You don't sort of tread water and make excuses for anything. And so I was learning like so fast. But the first game that they had me do, they gave me the source to a game and said, can you get that onto another platform? And I took something from the Sinclair Spectrum and put it onto the Amstrad, which was a big another major platform in the United Kingdom and Europe. And so I took the game and I worked out how it worked, and I got it working on this other platform, and it got 10 out of 10 reviews, and it was the best thing ever. And then I was there to stay. No one's trying to get rid of me.
Right.
We're all good now.
That's when you want to go back to your teachers and go, see? No, don't worry about biology. I'm sticking with games.
We're going to be fine. I'm going to stay here now. And so off we went, and we started making, games, and I became part of the team.
Now, you worked on some pretty big games too at that time, right? You were working on Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, right? Because it was known as Hero Turtles.
Right. I like the Spanish version the best, the Tortugas Ninja, which was, but they kept changing the name depending on where it was being sold.
Right.
But yeah, this was the biggest discovery for me career-wise, was branding actually matters. And so if I make a game called Jumpy Boy, I have to convince the whole world to play Jumpy Boy.
Right.
If I make the Teenage Mutant Ninja or Hero Turtles, it goes straight to number one.
Yeah.
And it's a hit-driven business. So if you have a number one hit, everybody wants to work with you. And so that was a huge discovery for me. Yeah. That game literally just went straight to number one, and I had endless offers to do things.
Yeah. But then you also worked on like the Terminator license as well, right? Another massive blockbuster type property.
Yeah, the Terminator was actually my first Sega Genesis game, and that was something else in this time. Is you have this belief that you can just do anything. And I would get given a manual for the Genesis that was just garbage. It was this badly photocopied Japanese manual, and somehow we'd get it working. I still don't quite know how we did it, but we just got things working. Sometimes like I found things in the that weren't documented, but I got them working on the platform. Like, so there was things that you would make discoveries because because it's not clear. You find yourself experimenting. Anyway, the Terminator was a bit of a disaster, actually, because what happened was can you imagine someone says to you, would you like to do the Terminator? And you're like, oh, yes. And then you think, well, how am I going to, if I'm the Terminator, what am I going to do? And they go, wait, we pump the brakes. There's no, you can't use Arnold Schwarzenegger in the game. We don't have the rights. And so we're like, what? Like the Terminator game without the Terminator, every gamer wants to be the Terminator. And then they said, well, you'll have to come up with a better solution or some of the solutions. So we decided to be Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton in the movie. And they go, wait, we don't have Linda Hamilton either. so we go, wait, well, who do we have? And they go, we have the guy that dies in the movie. And that's it. You're making the game starring the guy that dies in the movie.
Is that when you said, can we just call it The Terminated then? If it's the one that dies.
Yeah, and the actual box had a picture of Arnold on it, but that was all they licensed was an image. So this was the beginning of what I really consider to be when licensing was getting going properly, because a lot of the people that make these decisions weren't video gamers. And so they if you would go in an office to license something like that, the person behind you is about to make a coffee cup and they're licensing it too, and they want that image for their coffee cup. Right. And so that's what licensing was back then. And it was really frustrating, like just so frustrating. And obviously that got better over time. Why? Because the people that grew up with video games started to make these decisions. And of course that's stupid. You'd never do that now. But back then, that's what we had to deal with. So yeah, it was challenging. But that game changed my whole life, because what happened was we were making the Terminator, and I get a call from the head of Virgin in Virgin Interactive, who were going to publish it in the US. They called me up from California and said, hey, we have another project after this that's super important, and it's got a terrible deadline, and we think you can get it done. So will you just go to the airport, get on a plane, and come to California? Whatever you get paid, we'll pay you more. We'll get you a car, an apartment, anything you want. Just get on a plane and come to California. And so I was single at the time, and I'm like, why not? Let's go.
You can make those moves. All right. Before you jump across the pond to California, I want to ask you just one or two really quick questions here. So, as you're cutting your teeth and you're learning these things, and you're learning by doing, as you pointed out, right? There's no roadmap for this stuff. People, I mean, it's not even really an industry yet. It is being formed, right? What were, what was maybe like one or two of like the key learnings that you had during that period of time that stuck with you, that was part of the way you developed games going forward? Like what is a lesson that you took away from working in that environment beyond the licensing one, which is a really good one, right? But personally, like, was there something you said, man, I'm so glad I learned this here, and I'm going to make sure that I either watch out for this going forward? Or what was a lesson or takeaway from that era?
Well, there's a few things that you learn is when you're working with other people or for other people, you start to learn what it's like to manage people, and because you're being managed. And so you're like, are they doing a good job of managing me, for example? Do I feel well managed and supported and whatever else? And I, at the time, I didn't. So I felt I have to go and start my own company. I can't. It's an interesting question, because I'm mentoring a student right now, and I asked him yesterday, what is your plan? Is it to work for people, or is it to people work for you? And it's an actual decision that you should have clear in your head which is more interesting to you, because they're very different strategies. And I found that being in a room and making the games just as part of a team was cool. And just to be clear, we made the whole game by ourselves. It wasn't like there was 4 people like coding or something. It was one coder. And in certain cases, they shouldn't have allowed us, but we did some of the graphics ourselves, which we shouldn't be allowed to do.
Right.
But anyway, what I did was I found that by going out and starting my own little company, and then choosing the artists and people that I wanted to work with, the quality went up. And so that was probably one of the big discoveries, is which is I guess the point is you have to be willing to take that risk, because now there's no steady salary. You're on your own. You're going to have to find projects and all the rest of it. But I think that was probably making that decision. It's time to do this by myself. I think it was an important milestone. And I think, I don't know what else. The other one is probably relating to code. The thing that I learned was in programming, when you're doing, let's say, for example, you're programming everything in BASIC. At some point, you have to move to assembly language. And the way I actually did that was I wrote an assembly language. I wrote code that would check my code. And why did I do that? Because I wanted to write the fastest code possible. So I wrote code that checks your code to help you make it as fast as possible. But what I realized is what happened there was it forced me to learn the language to a crazy degree, right? It's like, imagine you were teaching English and as a teacher, and then you have to write code that checks English, and now you're really studying how sentences are formed, etc. It gave me an intensely detailed knowledge of every single instruction and how it worked, and how fast it was and what other options there were. And I ended up, by just writing code to check my code, I think that was a huge breakthrough for me, and it helped immensely in the years that followed from sort of learning that.
What I find so interesting, as I mentioned, I interviewed Graham Devine before. And so when I asked him, what's the first language you started programming? He was like, well, I wrote only in assembly up through the end of the 7th guest. I'm like, wait, like you're well past the time when we had, languages, compilers, things like that. It's like, no, it was always assembly. And then I had to go and shift, during the 11th hour. And where I love that overlap of you learning at that level to improve your code, and through that process became incredibly proficient, could wring all of the power that you needed to out of these machines as much as you could. But also that the both of you had worked for Virgin at the time. Now, as I mentioned to him before, we knew it here in the States as Virgin Mastertronic, right? It was that triangle-shaped logo with the cool, grid on there, and everything felt very European, right? Because we didn't have, as you pointed out, the only thing that we had access to were the magazines here in the States, and friends that had, games that were made here in the States. So when these games kind of started coming over, we were like, well, of course, we're little kids like, oh, Virgin, that's a funny name, right? But you get offered by Virgin Games to come over to the United States. And I believe that really it's at this point that really cemented, right, your start, like as one of these, legends, right? The games that you worked on that really kind of started that trajectory for David Perry, right? And you worked on some of the best platformers for the Genesis there, right? McDonald's Global Gladiators and Cool Spot and
Yeah, McDonald's was the first one, and so we finished the Terminator, and then they said, "You got 6 months to do this McDonald's game. We got to get it done." And they had great talent in the building, so they had great artists and designers and stuff that could be part of the team, and so we ended up making this game because it's hard when someone says make a McDonald's game. Well, what do you do? And we looked at the different properties they have, and there's one where they have these two characters, Mick and Mac, and so we thought that would be the way to go. So we built that game, and when you have great animators and all the rest of it, great audio, as a result, it started to look really professional. And then in comes the executives from McDonald's to see our game, and they hate it. They think it's terrible because there's no Ronald McDonald in the game. And we were stuck because we were like, no, but nobody likes Ronald McDonald. We don't really want him in the game. And they insisted you have to put him in. So we stuck him in at the end of the levels and like waving a flag. And so we shipped the game, and the game ended up winning Game of the Year and Graphics of the Year and all the rest of it. We got all kinds of awards for that game, which was kind of funny because that was very, I don't know if it's the first one, but very early advertising in games. Like it was very early to be really blatantly a McDonald's game. Like it wasn't there was no just a billboard somewhere with a McDonald's logo snuck on it. It was the McDonald's game. And so the reality is it made advertising okay, and they supported it, and we ended up the game did very well. So that left me in the exact same situation. I had entered into this new team in the US, just like I had done in England. Everyone's like, who is this guy? Does he even know what he's doing? And then at the end of it, our game did really well. So they're like, will you please stay? Like, don't go. Because I was intending to go back to England. I had a car sitting in my garage in my house waiting for me to go back to England. And I ended up not doing that. And literally everything got covered in cobwebs. My car died, because I just didn't go back. There was no need to. And so the second game they offered was 7-Up's game, which funnily enough was advertising again.
Yeah, I was going to say,
here, this advert game, we tried to make it as fun as possible. It was starring this red dot that's part of the 7-Up logo. I didn't know that was a character, but that red dot is called Cool Spot. And so we built a whole game around Cool Spot, and that did really well as well.
Yeah. And that's what Graham was talking, because prior to Cool Spot, they did the Spot puzzle game, right? Which was, the Othello, type of game. But the coolest thing about it, and then we saw other games like Battle Chess and things like that kind of do this. Although Archon was doing it before this, right? Which was, when the character moves, it's not just a chip flip, right? It turns into the character and he moonwalks to the spot and spins and dips back in. So, this was the continuation of this unlikely character. A red dot in the middle of the 7-Up logo now has multiple games built around, around his identity.
They should do more. I think they should keep that alive. I thought it was people really liked the character because it was fun and silly, and so you could see we were on a roll at that point. Sega was part of that whole process, and Sega came back saying, look, we have this other problem, which is Aladdin for Disney, and we've been trying to build the game and we're not making the progress that we need. Could you guys just take that on? And we were in the middle of working on Jungle Book for Disney, and Jungle Book was looking beautiful. I mean, I love Jungle Book. I thought I couldn't wait to launch Jungle Book because people were going to go, wow, these graphics are amazing. The team we had assembled at Virgin, like talent-wise, was unbelievable. And so I was so excited about Jungle Book, and then along comes Aladdin, and like, stop Jungle Book, work on Aladdin. So we had to sort of steal bits out of Jungle Book to try to get Aladdin done as quickly as possible. But the result was we got Aladdin done in time. They were doing the launch on VHS,
Yeah,
which was a big deal at the time, and we launched with that. And the game, I mean, it was the most unfair situation ever. So Jeffrey Katzenberg was supporting us. It was the head of all the studios, and he said, what do you guys need? And we're like, we want Disney to do the animation, and so they actually agreed to do that because he had the power to do that. And so they did the animation in Florida. So basically the animation team at Disney animated our game and sent the frames to us, and then we put them into the game. That's incredibly unfair. If you're an animator in the game industry and you're now competing against the feature animation team at Disney, that's not fair. So you have these really fluid, beautiful animations of Aladdin doing all his things, and yeah, it was done by them. And I think that sort of, for our team, changed our whole perspective on how animation should be done. So from that point forward, it's going to sound crazy, but our animators worked with pencils instead of pixels, which you would assume they would be sitting there with some kind of editor animating things. That's not how we worked at all. People were using pencils and cameras to scan the drawings that they were drawing, and that turned into the most fluid kind of animation ever.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about one of those games that, again, further established your process and the way you approached animation and gameplay and design going forward. But I want to ask you, I mean, so you are, you worked on Terminator, you worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, then you worked on big, company brands that did exceedingly well. Now here you are, still this, this young program in this still kind of a new space. And you're building Disney properties, right, in this relatively new medium as far as kind of the mass market is concerned. And the thing about Aladdin was it changed the way we all looked at the way side-scrolling games and those types of things are done. It was an achievement that stood up equally alongside the principal product, right, which was the movie. Like, you must have been going, what? Like,
no, Disney was so supportive. It was madness. I mean, even I kind of joked back then I was welcome at Disneyland because we had to go. We were given the keys to the park at that point, but not anymore. But once you move on, it's over. But for the while, our relationship with Disney was incredible. But Jeffrey Katzenberg ended up coming to the press launch for the game, and so did Richard Branson from Virgin, because it's Virgin plus Disney. And then the CEO of Sega came at the same time to that event. So it was pretty epic. And just to explain, in the game industry, press launches weren't that big a deal. I mean, it was, it just wasn't that big a thing.
Right.
And so imagine you're in a room filled with press, and like a major ballroom filled with press from around the world, and I go to the wrong floor in the building. So I actually took the elevator to the wrong floor, and the doors open, and there's just a sea of people in Aladdin costumes and elephants and everything else, and I literally was like, what is going on? Because I didn't know they were going to do this. And so I closed the doors in the elevator and went to the right floor. And during the press launch, the doors open and in come all the like a full Aladdin show. And that's the difference when you're working with Disney. It was really, really epic. And we really enjoyed that entire process. So I have a problem then. What do I do? This thing's made an absolute fortune, countless millions of dollars. What do I do? Do I just keep doing this? Because I'm literally, during Aladdin, I was sleeping in my car because I was so tired I couldn't drive home, and so I'm sort of going, what is this? Is this my future? And then interestingly, this company reached out called Playmates Toys, and Playmates makes the Disney toys, or at least they certainly did back then.
Right.
And they also made the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle toys. How weird is that, right? This company,
you can't get away from it. You can't get away from those properties.
But
right.
boy, oh boy, that helps in the conversation that you know, oh, I've worked on that in the past. And so they said to me, look, we'd like to get into video games. We make toys. We'd like to get into video games. And so will you join our company and start an interactive department? And I said, actually, no, I'm not interested in doing that, but I am interested in having my own company and you fund it. And so we did a 3-game deal with Playmates.
Yep.
And then we got into this really interesting situation is what do you make? Because obviously the answer is let's find something with a cool brand on it. And I went to meeting after meeting with the CEO of Playmates Toys, just visiting all of the studios and all these different rights holders, trying to find something. Mm-hmm. You know, and we're looking at Knight Rider and all of these kind of properties that were kind of cool at the time. But the team wasn't thrilled because we want to animate, we want to do pencil animations, and Knight Rider isn't ideal for that. So, you know, it's like, what are we going to make here? And it started to become a little bit concerning. Like, we don't actually have a plan. So what are they funding? This is one of those classic, you know, you get a little bit ahead of yourself,
right?
A little bit over your skis. So we were deciding, what do we do? And then Mike Dietz was our lead animator, who was from all of these previous games. And Mike said, look, I've got this friend I'd like to bring on our team. His name's Doug Tenaple, and we'd like to have him be an animator. And I said, well, can you show me something? And so they had him do a demo, and the demo he ended up drawing was Earthworm Jim. And so
okay. All right, let's unpack just a piece of this first. Okay, so you move on after Aladdin and Jungle Book, right? Those were completed. Now you're off doing yourself. This company is called Shiny Entertainment. I also have to say the Genesis version of Aladdin, not the Capcom one, is the best version. And I don't know if you saw it, I'm sure you have, but the Video Game History Foundation, right? I sit on the board over there. I need to, as a disclaimer, they went ahead and did this wonderful piece back in 2017 where they found all the original source code, art assets, everything else that you've done, including all of the tools and design stuff, and unearthed like art and animation that wasn't in the final product, right? So the whole archive, right, is there. So I'll make sure I post a link for people to go ahead and check it out. It is amazing the scope and breadth of what you were all doing and knowing what you had to kind of whittle it down to, which once again stood as one of the best games, on the platform. All right, so now you're out of there. This is 1993 ish, and you get out there, and the name of the company is Shiny Entertainment. And is it true that you got inspiration from the REM song Shiny Happy People? Is that where that comes from?
Yeah, it's true. We couldn't think of a name. Like, what do you call your company? I don't know. So Shiny Happy People was on the radio at the time, and we're like, shiny sounds good. We didn't realize that about 50% of people spell it with or without the E. So we only bought the domain shiny.com, which is probably worth a lot of money today.
Yeah.
I wish we just bought a lot more domains back then, but we didn't buy it with the E, and we found a lot of people were going to some other company.
All right, so now you're in there. You take a look at this demo from Doug, and this is the character Earthworm Jim. I mean, it isn't typical that the very first thing that people bring forward as an idea just resonates and rings so soundly that this is the character, right? This is the thing that we're going to build beyond. So can you talk to us a bit about the creation of Earthworm Jim and the team that you had, that you pulled together?
Yeah, we had such incredible people. So my best artist from the United Kingdom was Nick Broody, and Nick Broody came over and joined Virgin, and so he came to Shiny as well. Steve Crow was also an incredible artist at Virgin. He decided to join us. We had another guy, Christian, who was just unbelievable pixel artist, like just unbelievably talented. I would argue maybe at the best at the time at that kind of pixel art. And we just put together this team of people that came over. But again, it was very clear they had pencils in their hands and were waiting to start animating. So how great you have this character that is requiring immense amount of animation, so immense sort of ability to make this funny thing. And so what we did is we had a bit of a cheat. We had laser discs, which was the media at the time, running in the office playing Tex Avery cartoons 24/7. So imagine screens just around with watching characters being spun around and thrown against walls and all the rest of it. That's actually very inspirational, because they tend to, like Tex Avery, when you punch somebody, you punch all the way through and out the other side, so you see the shape of their fist on the other side, and then it comes back. And so it's giving the animators inspiration all the time to sort of go beyond the typical just run animation or something like that.
Right.
And so Earthworm Jim, we looked at it, and I love I'm a big fan. I've always been a fan of this idea of what I call payback time, which is when you go from weak to strong. I think it's a great game mechanic. If your character is, I don't want to say weak, but weak, not great.
He's a worm.
And then you upgrade. And so all the stuff that's been really a big problem for you is not a problem for you when you're upgraded. And so that switch as it occurs is really fun. And so the idea of an earthworm in a cybernetic suit that's super powerful when the suit's on, but absolutely useless when it's off, is a theme that you'll see in some of the other games that I was involved in as well. Yeah. So
I think the humor that comes through it too, right? The unexpected launching the cow, like the first time that happened to people, like, what the hell is this? And it doesn't show up until the end of the game, right? Like, and it's like, I completely forgot this, and so it created this world, this persistent world, right? That these actions that happened before, right, kind of emerged later. And again, it changed the way we thought about characters and animation in these types of side-scrolling games, these types of properties on these platforms. And so Earthworm Jim comes out, super smash hit, and then we have Earthworm Jim 2, completely ups everything about what you've done before, including all the different mini games. So you have different types of perspectives happening here, pseudo 3D, of Jim flying into the rings. And so really kind of flexing your strengths as developers and as designers. And it's at that point that Shiny gets acquired by Interplay, right? During that period, and things took a bit of a turn, right? So Shiny is working on games like MDK, which was amazing, Wild 9, which I loved, RC Stunt Copper, which I remember you and I were standing in the lobby, I think, of the Intercontinental at a GDC, and you were talking about how you were, a huge fan of flying model helicopters. And so it's like, I get to make a game, kind of about this. Things like Messiah, where you were working on engines that could adapt their geometry and the resolution of information on the fly based on what was happening within the frame or on multiple types of hardware, right? So you are just stretching yourself in a whole bunch of different directions here just to start getting to 3D, right?
Yeah, it was an interesting time because I had a problem, and I'm not sure everyone fully understands the problem, but I was financially responsible for the company. Like it was an S corporation, which is I'm a sole proprietor of this company, and I'm in charge of it, and and I was very personally worried about 3D. I didn't know anything about it. I'm sitting with a room full of pencil artists saying that that they're not interested in 3D. Like they didn't want to put those pencils down.
Right.
And then I'm watching people were buying Silicon Graphics workstations. I think it was like, I seem to remember like $25,000 or something to buy the setups.
I was at Sun Microsystems at the time. They were all $20,000, $30,000 workstations.
Everything was expensive, right? And we needed another one, and we needed another one, and we needed another one, and it was not a good time. So I was buying this hardware, and nobody wanted to do it. And then I hired a guy, I'm not going to name him, but I hired a guy that was supposedly an expert in 3D. And it turned out he was one of the most awful people to work with. Oh, he was awful. The whole team rebelled against him. I'm like, this 3D thing is not working for me. And I ended up selling the company to Interplay. But the thing that I didn't think about was that we forget the talent we had in the building was so good. There was one of the engineers was called Andy Astor, who had been helping me with tools previously. I didn't know he was a freaking Jedi at 3D. Nobody ever mentioned this, right? And then we hired one other guy, and him plus the other guy, his name's Brownlow. Forgotten his first name right now, but together they were just like 3D Jedis, and they made MDK, and our artists were like the artists that we had, like Nick Broody from the UK, were happy to move over because he was not a pencil person.
Yeah.
And so we sort of made a transition as a company and went full bore into 3D. We made this game MDK, and there was a lot of discussion of what does that even mean, MDK.
Everyone was always like murder, death, kill. Isn't that what that is supposed to be, right?
We can't call it that because Walmart won't stock
That's
it.
Right.
Right. So we can't call it that. That's not what it's called. And so we ended up making this game, and the game it did okay, but it was suffering from that problem, which is it's not a license. So we had to convince the world that this thing would be worth playing, and that was hard. You had to do marketing; it was going to be expensive. But we had this unbelievable breakthrough, which is the idea of getting your products on new hardware. What people didn't realize is we were making money on like Apple, the first Mac, those really colorful Macs, the first ones, they actually all had MDK pre-installed. So basically you could, it was as a light version of it. It was like but they were actually paying us for every unit sold. And once we realized that there's money in these hills, we started doing these deals everywhere. So lots of different computer manufacturers had our games pre-installed, and we're paying, it's usually around 75 cents or $1 per unit, which was amazing. And then we started doing joystick deals, NVIDIA's, and our 3DFX was the card company at the time. We had all these different companies that were doing deals to license games, and so that was the way, that turned out to be the way to really augment whatever you were currently building. And so turned out MDK was a bit of a cult hit because it's crazy and silly and weird, and it was funny and had crazy ideas that people hadn't really seen before.
Yeah.
And so that brought us into the world of 3D, and we made it. Like we survived.
Yeah. And I remember when it launched on the Dreamcast, and when I was at Sun at the time and I was trying to convince them, to go after video games, I actually used MDK in this music video that I assembled internally. When the main character is standing there at these doors on the initial ship and they open, and he just trips, falling out. And you see him kind of stumble out. And you're like, this is supposed to be the hero. It was just really, it was such a fun game with really interesting mechanics. You had, a scope that you could use. You had to fly and open up that chute to fly through different parts of the geometry to be able to, and you had to kind of figure out how to move forward in the space. Those decisions weren't always obvious, right? But the mechanics were wide enough and varied enough that you eventually figured out, right, what the puzzle is to kind of get out of an area or move on.
That was the Andy Astor effect right there. Was the sniper rifle was the first, I believe that was the first sniper rifle ever in a video game. And what it meant was you could see things a mile away, and you could what we were talking about internally was, I want to be able to shoot something in the eye from a mile away, right? Is that possible? And that conceptually seemed profoundly hard, but again, these guys were like, no, we can do that.
Right. And so not only are you shooting it a mile away, I remember the first time that you did zoom in, the character you're shooting at is dancing, and then they turn around and shake their butt at you and then turn back around. You're like, this is the threat?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you have MDK.
You'll ever be able to shoot them.
Yeah. All right. So you got MDK, and then so now Shiny is now is sold off. I remember when Bruno Bonnell was on stage at the Game Executive Summit in 2001, right? And I was like, man, they're just on a tear acquiring companies. few years later, they had rebranded to Atari. But during that time, you were working on, this is your connection back into movies, back into games. You're working on Enter the Matrix, right? With the Wachowskis. So did they call you? Did you call them? Like,
yeah, so
what happened?
I get this call from Joel Silver's office. We have a new movie we're making starring Keanu Reeves. And by the way, Keanu Reeves was not a big deal at that moment in time. Just before The Matrix, he wasn't at peak Keanu Reeves. They really peaked Keanu Reeves with The Matrix. But so I didn't know what to do with that because I'm in the middle. We're making a game called Sacrifice, and Sacrifice was doing really well. It was just state-of-the-art technology. Intel was all over us like a rash because they wanted to support it because it pushed everything to the limits. And so we were very excited about this Sacrifice game. We believed it was going to be a really big deal. And here I have this Matrix thing, and I'm like, okay, I'll drive to LA and to see what this is about. And I drove up to LA, and they didn't really have anything to show because they didn't shot the movie yet, but they had this they showed me like this fire burning, and they had been doing some experimentation with the bullet time idea, but it wasn't bullet time. It was more of just a demo. And it was a terrible mistake, but I just didn't get it. And that saying, what is the Matrix?
I was about to say,
I didn't get it. And I was like, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm busy. We're doing this Sacrifice game. And so I dipped out, and we didn't make the Matrix. And so then I go and see the Matrix movie, and I'm sitting in the theater with my wife, and she's kicking me going, this is a great movie.
You dummy.
And I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? Right? This is a disaster. I have to. And so then Joel Silver's office called me again and said, look, do you want to try again? We're going to do another Matrix movie. And you can imagine I nearly got a speeding ticket getting to his office, right? I'm like, I'm all over this. I want the Matrix. And so the Wachowskis were just super cool, and they were very interested in doing something that hadn't been done before in the form of making movie footage. They shot an hour of movie footage that just for the video game. And they wrote the story, so it all tied together correctly with the movie. And so we just had to build the game and make it all actually function, following their story. And there was one twist to it, which was that they wanted you to play as Jada Pinkett Smith.
Yeah, Niobe.
And and guess what? I'm having the same problem. I want to be the Terminator, so I want to be Neo. And it's, you can imagine the gamer's like, this is cool, but we really want to be Neo. So we made a second game, which was called Path of Neo. So you could actually play as Neo, and we have all the bullet time and everything. So it was a really fun time. We got to work on a very, very high end. I mean, I would say Matrix was probably one of the biggest licenses ever in the video game industry. The press launch was amazing. I got to meet Keanu and everybody. They were all on the green carpet. And Bruno Banel was there as well. But it turned out Atari actually bought our company just to publish that game. So, and being part of Atari was really fun because I got an Atari business card, and that's the best business card ever. Like everywhere you go, like people want to tell you their Atari story. So there's a real nostalgia for Atari. But that was a fun time for sure.
Amazing. All right, so I'm going to move us through quickly because we have questions that are starting to pile up here, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time too, but there's so much more we could dig into. Maybe we have a part 2 at some point. All right, so Enter the Matrix is out. You're working on this project called Plague at Atari, and then financial issues hit, and really during that period, right, we saw a lot of that happening, right? So in 2006, Shiny is sold off to Foundation 9, right? We're mutual friends of ours, Chris Charla, right, who's now, director at Microsoft doing ID on Xbox, who's done a phenomenal job, like supporting the independent game developer space. And Mike Micah, right, who's at Other Ocean and Digital Eclipse, right? They were both there. And I think actually leaving around the same time that, Shiny came in. Shiny came into Foundation 9. So you decide to leave. And in 2008, you found this cloud gaming, or better yet, like a pixel streaming company called Gaikai. You did this just before OnLive, right? Had started up, but how did
it's
you?
a complicated time. Let me fill in a couple of blanks here. So, yeah, there was a gap there where I ended up. There's one gap that did change things. Is what happened was I pitched Atari this game called Plague, which I thought was going to be the best game ever. I was so excited about it, and they're like, "This is going to cost a lot of money, and we can't afford to pay it." And so I left. But what I did was I teamed up with a guy called Howard Marks, who was the original chairman of Activision Studios, and he had bought the brand Acclaim. Acclaim used to be a really big video game company.
That's right.
So he bought their actual name and the URL. So imagine he and I now have a URL and a name. What are we going to do with that? And we flew off to China and Korea and started to look at free-to-play games because we thought this free-to-play thing is going to be a big deal at some point in the West as well. And so we were some of the first Westerners to ever step foot in these offices. They were so thrilled that we had taken the time, and they would Google us and go, "Wow, Acclaim's a really big company." It's like, no, actually, we just bought them. Never mind. So, but we ended up taking some of those products and bringing them over to the West, and so we were learning a lot about free to play and what worked and all the rest of it. But one of the surprising problems they have is the time it takes to go from I'm interested to installing and playing was quite a long time, and so we were very interested in how could we speed this up? What technologies could we create? The web at the time was all about Flash, with Farmville was the thing. I remember going to Kleiner Perkins, one of the big VC firms, and they're like, "David, you missed the boat. You should have been doing Flash games, like that's the future, not this, normal games." And so we were thinking, well, the one thing that Flash games potentially can do is load really fast, and so you can just go somewhere and be playing the game.
Right.
And so that's the path that we chose, was how could we make real games, like professional games, appear instantaneously in a browser. And that also our paths crossed again, right?
It sure did.
Because I needed help. I want our technology to be the best technology in the world, period. And Flash ain't going to do it. So, and at the time, you were with Java, with Sun, and we needed Java because it had the performance that we needed.
Yeah.
To embrace this idea. And thank goodness you were there at the time to actually, because you understood, you're like, that makes total sense. Let's make it really good. Like, how can we help you make this really good? And that helped me build a company. So because we were then able to do demonstrations that were pretty impressive technology wise. And we came up with this simple idea, which is, if everything is streaming, movies, music, books, everything, why not video games? And someday it will be video games. Do we have to each buy a $500 console and have a $500 experience? In the cloud, we could be having a $10,000 experience or a $50,000 experience. So why not have that be the future? So the tagline we came up with was everything, everywhere, instantly. That's what this is going to allow someday. Every video game ever made, anywhere you want, instantaneously. And we built the tech to do that. And what happened, the history there, which I don't know if you know, is Samsung actually signed a deal with us to power their television. So suddenly all the Samsung TVs could have Call of Duty or FIFA Soccer, whatever they wanted. And then LG also signed. So when Sony heard about this, they're like, wait a minute. like we don't want this competition. So they bought our company. And that was really fun time. But the technology we created was pretty cool. It was we were able to play games. And I know people won't believe it, but trust me, and you can read some articles at the time, people that actually experienced it. We had the same, even though the game was coming from the cloud, it played exactly the same as the game that was playing locally. Yeah. And there's all kinds of people say that's impossible, but we found ways to do it. Yeah. And so that's what made Sony say we have to buy this.
I will tell you, during that time, I remember getting the call and it's like, hey, we're doing this new thing. And we have all these security pop-ups with Java. We need to get those out of the way. Like, we got to get to low friction, right? So I'm like, all right. And then we have to optimize to make sure the playback's good, right? And that's how we were able to get that there. But, taking that back internally, You know, they were like, oh no, it's about J2ME. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
it is about J2. It is, stop forgetting the desktop. Like, this is going to be super important. And at the time, you know, my team had been building, you know, the high performance APIs for, you know, like Minecraft was using and stuff like that, right? But what I remember was really compelling about what you were describing was, look, even if people don't want to do that and they want to own the game, let's let them taste it right on Best Buy's website so they can get in and play a quarter of Madden before they hit the buy button. And I think what's really good about that is in the mind of the consumer, then, even with some of the issues that we had at the time, right? Last mile issues have always been a problem, right, for the internet, because people's personal networks are messy. You know, when people are like, my internet's so slow at home. Yeah, because you have 85 different devices. You hooked your coffee maker to this and it's sucking bandwidth and it's doing stuff. They don't know how to manage that stuff. But when you kind of wrap it in for this type of experience, it's not going to be the best, the highest resolution or whatever. So you have that caveat of, oh, I'm tasting this. I love this thing. And the thing I'm going to buy is even better. So you have one side of that, which is kind of the ad and promotional side. Then you have the other side, which is now let's deliver the console quality, you know, version of this. And I remember, so my post-Sun and pre-AWS days, I was working for another company and our paths crossed yet again around this. And I remember coming in, you know, my team was working with your team over at Sony. And I remember we were sitting down talking like, oh yeah, this TV, you don't want to play it on because they have like 2 extra planar boards in there with another 3 feet of cabling. So it adds this much latency to it, right? It always reminded me of, like, you know, PCs and stuff in the 70s and 80s. Actually, even later into the 2000s, where at Sun, we were working on things like proximity connections to be able to effectively stack CPUs or chips and eliminate wires to bring down latency, right? Raise throughput. Yeah. So we weren't just measuring latency on the network. We're like, oh no, that TV has an extra 3 feet of cable. So don't buy that one. Buy this one, right? It was just.
So the thing, I don't know if we ever explained to you, but you know, the big breakthrough that we discovered at the time was everything had latency. Everything was latency, latency, latency. So all these engineers went on record saying this is a stupid idea because if I press a key here and it has to go to Los Angeles and back, the experience will always be terrible. So this is a stupid idea. And I had investors going, these are experts saying you're wrong and this is never going to work and all the rest of it. But what we did, which I think you'll find fun, was no one ever thought, well, what if you run the game faster in the cloud? Like, why would I run the game at the same speed as local? If we run it faster in the cloud, we save time, we compress time. So now we have time to do the transmissions. We have the extra latency back because we've just made the game run faster. Yeah. And there was all kinds of other tricks that we discovered. But let's just say at the end of the day, it is actually possible to save time versus having it running locally, if you think about it. Yeah. So that was a big breakthrough.
And again, you know, David, I think one of the most impressive things too is you didn't just think about this one thing. It's about all these different breakpoints in the chain, right, to make the experience better. Okay, so, you know, moving through real quickly. So you leave Sony around 2017, and you started a company called Go Viral, which was which sought to help influencers connect with brands that they wanted to work with. So once again, it seems to be part of your career is how do I make this easier, faster, frictionless, wider audience, right? With whether it's technology or your business models. And then that company took a pivot to Caro. And Caro helps Shopify stores allow you to cross-sell across them while not having to maintain inventory and worry about minimal order numbers or invoicing. So can you tell us real quickly about, you know, what is Caro and...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what happened was, imagine I now have every hobby in the world. I have a huge man cave with all kinds of woodworking and metalworking and 3D printing and has a full photo studio. And I decide... And I start doing photography, and then I realize no one cares about my photography. But if I take pictures of influencers, they care. And I'm like, this is interesting because I got some kids, friends of my daughter in the room, and they have 15 million followers. And I just went to an Ed Sheeran concert, and there was only 60,000 there, but that was a lot of people. 60,000 was a lot. They have 15 million. And I start talking to them, and they're like, our biggest concern in the world is we wish we could work with the brands that we like. We keep having brands say to sell my candles, but I don't even use candles. I'm 16, you know, I don't care about candles. And so it was this, it was an observation of there's a problem here that needs to be solved. And I don't know anything about this space, but you know what? This is a technology problem. So let's just go solve this. And I joined up with a co-founder, and we went after it. And we built technology that allowed brands to work out which influencers have been buying their products. And then it's still the same company, by the way. It just before we didn't have a brand name for it. It's now called Caro, but it's still the same company. But we worked on the influencer piece, and then is that a really big thing? Like, is that a multi-billion-dollar company? And we're like, I don't think so. There's never been an exit for any company in the space that's huge for that kind of for influencer stuff. So then we went, well, where's the really big opportunity here? And we had this realization is, imagine you made a protein bar. You don't build Whole Foods to sell your protein bar. You just try to get it into Whole Foods and enjoy their traffic. And then you go and try and get it into Target and Costco and Walmart. Your goal is to get into other people's traffic. And so we then thought, well, how does that work online? Who does that for you? Who takes your product and gets it into lots of traffic? Guess what? Nobody. You're on your own. So most people are building little stores and trying to convince the internet to visit their store. Yeah. Push your products into everyone else's stores. So we started with really obvious things like, here's a bicycle company and here's a helmet company. Would you guys like to work together? This bicycle traffic is pretty great for your helmets. And we can just wire the two together, and now you can sell the helmets. You don't have to buy any helmets. You don't have to put helmets in warehouses. Wholesale is the past. Clearance sales, you won't have to do any of that stuff. Just say yes, and helmets will appear in your store. And now you'll be able to start selling all the colors and all the sizes. And of course, they come back, can have gloves and locks and all the other things. So suddenly we have people doing business together, but this has turned out to be a much bigger thing than we originally thought. We're now powering all kinds of PayPal invested. We're powering websites like Netflix and Paris and Ellen DeGeneres' marketplaces, those kind of places. So and we just signed another big deal, which is confidential, but let's just say a major social network just got 1 million products from us. And it's turning out to be really interesting, even though I'm from the game industry. This is really weird to be in e-commerce, but I think I looked back and I said, well, hold on a minute. When we did that Gaikai thing, yes, it was game industry, but it was really cloud. And so we had to go and learn all about transit deals and servers and data centers and all that. And we just said, let's do it, and we did it. So why don't we do that with e-commerce? And I think that's one of the interesting pieces is that's the entrepreneurial side of it. Is there's nothing that you really can't do if you just choose to do it. You'll learn about it as you go, and maybe it's not the best way to do it, but
it seemed to have worked for you, man. From the beginning of, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to learn to do it, to just jumping in and coming with ideas. And I think coming at those types of problems tangentially, right? Kind of not knowing what you don't know, right? And then it creates this thing that may have either been obvious or people didn't recognize was a need. It's the way you discover those things. And the way to do is to be able to press forward. And it's something that is just, it impressed me about kind of every stage of your career, right? So you've managed to innovate and create and still, really at the top end of the industries that you get involved in. So it's pretty amazing, David. What is something that you see right now that you think may be kind of the future of where games are going to go? I know it's the typical question we always ask, but from your vantage point, working in so many different facets of this across your career, like what's the one thing that you see right now that really excites you about the future of where games are going or can go?
Someone sent me a message on LinkedIn recently. It was someone from the press saying, I think it was like 21 years ago, you talked about how AI is going to change gaming. And I was sort of explaining the problems that we were having. I call it the welcome to town traveler problem. So in a video game, you walk up to someone and they say, welcome to town traveler. You kill everybody and you walk up to them and they go, welcome to town traveler. That's a problem. That's not AI.
Yeah.
So the idea that the games are about to get a lot smarter is really exciting to me. There's a lot of games in the past where you're playing along and you get a sidekick, and then the sidekick starts trying to follow you, which is having a really hard time doing because it's not smart. And you have to get out of a building quickly, and you're trying to run down the stairs, and they're blocking the stairs because they can't negotiate stairs quickly. And you want to shoot your partner because you want to get out of there. And that is the example of where AI is a total disaster, and that's all going to change. So I'm very excited about how that's going to make the worlds much more immersive when people have memories of their conversations with you. Other people could talk about what's going on behind the scenes. You could learn things. It's going to be a very different experience than we have in the past, and controlling groups of people. And it's going to be fascinating. So for me, I think the AI is the Wild West. There's enormous opportunity in that space. And I also I do hope at some point cloud gaming really gets going at scale, because I want to experience games that people can't afford at home. So that takes me back to the arcade days. Do you remember when you would pay to experience a game you can't afford at home?
Yeah.
Like, I want to play Daytona, but I can't do it at home. And so you would pay for that until finally Daytona was at home. It was never quite as good, but they had Daytona at home. And so that idea that arcades sort of ended up going away, there was never that next step for arcades, which is if they go to the cloud, and now I'm playing on a very high-end machine, and getting an experience that's just breathtaking that I can't afford to pay for, for any players out there. I think that's an exciting future too.
Yeah. No, I agree that there's a tremendous amount of possibility space in which those technologies can play. And excellent answers.
We need elastic compute. That's a little one for AWS. We need elastic compute for games, please.
There we go. Elastic compute for games. Well, David, again, I want to thank you so much for taking time with us today to go over your incredible history and to give us insight into the stuff you're doing now and where we see this going. It is, again, personally, it's always a pleasure to see you. I'm just thrilled for the work that you've done and what you're embarking upon now. And can't wait to catch up at the next conference too. So
yeah, looking forward to catching up.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.